Hello again, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm still enjoying myself tremendously. I hope you are as well. It's been a wonderful conference. I found myself time and again challenged and inspired by the presentations, and delighted to make so many new friends in the company of so many dear old friends. But it's not over just yet. We have one more presentation, a wrap-up session, and of course, there's the barbecue. It's my privilege and a tremendous honor to introduce the speakers for the final presentation, Judy Tuwaletstiwa and Erik Whittemore. In 1998, I went to Pilchuck Glass School for the first time, and while there, encountered a fascinating artist named Judy Tuwaletstiwa. During that session, I saw a lot of slide presentations by a lot of artists, and to be completely honest, I do not remember much about any of them. But I've remembered Judy's for these 15 years because of a very specific sequence of images that she showed, which I believe she will touch on today, in which she painted the same canvas for many days. The painting changed every day, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot. Here was an approach to working in which the process was the purpose. The journey was the important thing, not the painting. Over the course of the next couple of weeks, when I wasn't in the thrall of my fast-talking and sharp-tongued, but incredibly generous instructor Mitchell Godet, I often saw Judy having quiet conversations with other artists and students. I wondered about these conversations, but did not manage to escape the gravity of the sun around which I was orbiting during that session long enough to find out what they were all about. But on Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, I think I got a pretty good sense of it as I assisted Judy as she worked with 24 artists over the course of 2 incredible workshops. I can hardly imagine how wonderful and transformative it must have been to work with her on an ongoing basis over a longer period of time, which is exactly what Erik Whittemore got to do over the course of the 18 months in which Judy was the artist in residence at the Bullseye Resource Center in Santa Fe. I met Erik Whittemore in June of 2004 when I interviewed and subsequently hired him to be a part of the research and education team at Bullseye. He immediately got to cut his teeth on ambitious projects, including working extensively with June Kaneko over the course of several years to produce the work in Kaneko's 2007 show, New Glass. It was Erik Whittemore who cold-worked Klaus Moyer's monumental Portland panels. And Erik Whittemore helped Dante Marioni adapt his concepts normally pursued in the hot shop to film forming. He's assisted artists like Clifford Rainey and Richard Whiteley at Northlands and Pilchuck. Erik and I co-developed much of Bullseye's basic kiln casting curriculum, and Erik also developed and taught our first workshops on cold working. So in early 2010, when he expressed his interest in taking the position of studio coordinator at our soon-to-open resource center in Santa Fe, I was thrilled. Yes, I was sorry to be losing him from my team in Portland, where he had contributed so much. But I was delighted for him and for us. I knew that with him in Santa Fe, we were well on our way to building an incredible team. Erik and that team have done tremendous work enabling students, collaborating with visiting instructors and artists, and ultimately building community. Fortunately for all of us, that community includes Judy Tuwaletstiwa. Please join me in welcoming Judy Tuwaletstiwa and Erik Whittemore.
beautiful introduction. Thank you.
Well, I didn't know I was going to have to follow Ted with my own introduction there. I'd actually I'm going to take a break from what I have on here just because I didn't know Ted was going to introduce me. I was actually standing in the shower about an hour and a half ago trying to think of how I was going to introduce myself and then introduce Judy and then come back to starting this talk. But I digress. We'll go ahead and continue now. So good afternoon. I'm sure that some of you are fantasizing about freshly annealed ribs and chicken and cold beer that's waiting us at the barbecue this evening. But before we overfill our plates at the behest of our stomachs, let us first allow our eyes to feast on color. The nature of the color of glass drew many of us to this material. Yet, we are perpetually hungry for larger and larger and larger palettes.
That's right.
Do you have a color that looks like this? Or why don't you have a good gold? Or, and this is a personal favorite of mine because I'm also red-green colorblind, you don't make enough greens. You can imagine how hard the product recognition test is when you can't actually see the colors. In January of 2012, we invited artist Judy Tuwaletstiwa to take part in a painting with glass class I was teaching at the Santa Fe Resource Center. We wondered if her working methodology could be adapted to kiln glass and what the result would be. Judy was not new to glass, as Ted had talked about earlier. She had been an artist in residence at Pilchuck twice. While there, she spent most of that time in the hot shop, learning what would happen when she intuited through this new material. Over the past 18 months, I've had the pleasure of exploring the nature of color through the lens of low-fired powders with Judy. We would like to share some of what we've learned with you. Please welcome Judy Tuwaletstiwa.
Thanks, Erik. Thank you. We've heard a lot about red, white, and black today, so let's take a few minutes simply to sit with those colors and think about your associations with these very primal, alchemical colors. We'll start with black. Is there any way to darken? Thank you. White. Red. Before we talk about the Bullseye Exchange, I would like to introduce you to my process. The power of the image to transform and heal individual and collective wounds guides my art. Internal and external landscapes inspire it. This dream from a decade ago shows one way to picture the internal landscape of the unconscious. Originating from the Earth's molten core, a great mountain emerged from the floor of an endless ocean. It grew as generations of organisms, flora and fauna, were born, lived, died, and decayed. The tip of the mountain surfaces above the water. I stand on the mountain, aware I originated from it, aware that when I die, I shall become part of it. I swim in the transformative waters of the vast ocean, knowing that I can return to this rooted mountain. Respect for process, a search for ways to organize the fluid material arising from the watery unconscious, and a constant seeking for what is essential weave my work together. The mediums and styles have changed over time. My art began when I was 2 years old. Sick with scarlet fever, I lay quarantined in a darkened room in Los Angeles' county hospital. My skin peeled. I had to keep my eyes closed because they hurt so much. My mother told me I spent a month. In that cocoon, I floated in a deep, dark, watery space. Forms arose and disappeared. I knew no names for them. Swim in the fever, the scarlet of the fever. Sink in dark water, suck in dark air. The water cradles, coiling, curling, rolling. Shadows shape and dissolve. I hurt, molten. No day, no night, no mommy, no daddy. People, food, words, no people, alone, the water. Many years passed before I found an entry into those shifting waters again. During 5 of those years, I studied English literature at Berkeley and Harvard, concentrating on the earthy and hallucinatory Middle Ages. I had no idea I was an artist, though I spent long hours in museums studying the work of source artists such as the Dogon people of Mali, Barnett Newman, David Smith, Philip Guston, Marcel Duchamp, and Vasily Kandinsky. When I was 29, a mother of 3 little boys, my daughter is still a few years away, my internal structure of reality began to disintegrate. The hypocrisy of the Vietnam War was doing the same to our collectively defined reality. I attended the exhibition Vincent van Gogh, Paintings and Drawings, at the D. Young Museum. Some of you might actually remember this exhibit. It was a powerful one. At the D. Young Museum in San Francisco. Standing before Wheat Field with Crows, the final painting in the exhibit, and Van Gogh's final painting before his suicide, I began sobbing. As we drove home, I continued to cry, as though grieving. Later, I read that Van Gogh, actually years later, had written to his brother Theo that he hoped his work would open the floodgates of the viewer's heart. It had opened mine. That night, for the first time since I was 11 years old, I made art, drawing this tree on a scrap of mat board. It was what I could do. When I was 11, a teacher had told me, I'd stayed up all night doing a painting, and the teacher had told me it was no good. And I stopped doing art. And sometimes I think we stop doing things that are so close to our soul because we need to protect ourselves. And I was very lucky that at 29, that door opened again. For many people, it doesn't open. And that's a tragedy. On the back of this drawing, I wrote 4 sentences. Nothing is enough when you are too hungry. The search for proportion. Jewish hand, will sing to whom it pleases to be born once again. Out of these veiled longings, certainly veiled to me at the time, arose the ritual that has become my art. A few years later, living in Edinburgh, Scotland with my family, I learned tapestry weaving from Archie Brennan. Using my fingers to open and close the warp, weaving the bobbin through the threads, tamping down the threads, a rhythmic and textured language grew from this ritualistically repetitive process that opened a way to organize reality as a woven structure. For one piece entitled, "Yes, I Am on Such a Journey Too," I asked many people to clothe themselves with its woven and knotted sections. I'm sorry, I'm touched. My son is here today, and one of the pictures, well, you'll see the difference in size. I asked many people to clothe themselves with the woven and knotted sections in a way that reflected their life's journey. I'll share the interpretations of my family, and my children and myself. This is my son Robert, who's on a vehicle moving. He now lives in Beijing. And this is my son David, wearing it, and very different interpretations. David, would you stand up for a second so they can see the slight difference in size? Yes. I had written the words, "I am on such a journey too," across in the tapestry. I had woven it. And this is Aram and his big wheels, and he now lives in Beijing also. The two on the vehicles found their way across the world. And my daughter Stacy with her interpretation, and my interpretation. On simple looms, artisans wove the complex medieval tapestries, such as the captive unicorn. By the way, that's not blood on the unicorn. It's pomegranate juice. It's not a symbol of being pierced. It's a symbol of fertility. Tapestry weaving taught me that the most fundamental, rudimentary techniques can best express the layers of complexity held in images that arise from the unconscious. It's like trying to express what a dream is. Complicated techniques sometimes get in the way, at least when I'm working. This realization informs every medium with which I've worked, including glass. After weaving for 5 years, I incorporated other fibers and learned to make paper from Dominic DeMary. For a decade, I sewed, etched, and manipulated paper and fiber into different shapes. I began showing this work in 1978 in both San Francisco and Los Angeles. In that same year, I made a triptych of prayer books for my father, who was dying of cancer. This was the book of beginning. He did not have an easy beginning. Feathers and unfired porcelain entered my vocabulary in the book of midlife. In the prayer book that encapsulates the final part of my father's life, book and story and texture as text build a visual language. These were about this big by this big. They were small. They were books. I stopped showing in 1982 after rushing some work for a show in San Francisco. I decided I would never do that again. I planned to develop a body of work over the next 3 to 5 years and then seek a gallery again or show in the same galleries I had showed in. But the muses were much wiser than I was. It was 15 years until I showed again. I worked that entire time, but no longer in paper. The paper had stopped speaking to me or for me. If I had been showing, I might not have noticed that. So I was lucky. In 1984, this is the Hopi Reservation in northern Arizona, Second Mesa. In 1984, I camped for a month in the desert canyons of the American Southwest. The land spoke in a language similar to that of dream, an alchemical language composed of the elements of earth, air, water, and fire, shadow, and light. Outside the demands of daily life, in landscapes where a thin membrane separates this world from the world of spirit, my mind quieted and my heart opened. I closely listened to and patiently observed the textures of nature. Light, rocks, and winds told stories in a language of eternal change. Inspired by the light, I felt compelled to paint when I returned home to Northern California. To deal with my anxiety, because I had never painted before, I laid out 40 sheets of 19 by 24 inch Bristol board. Using acrylic, I began knowing no matter how confused a painting might be, like this one, more sheets of paper waited in the pile. It's a wonderful exercise, by the way. This was my first painting, a sleeping or dead horse, a clothesline of men and women's clothing. This was the 21st painting, and in it I had found a universe that I wanted to enter. So I didn't know how to stretch my own canvases yet. Now I cut my own lumber and build them from scratch. I bought the 48 by 66 inch, I bought 5 48 by 66 inch canvases. I was trying to capture the light that I experienced in the desert, and little atomic particles seemed to be the answer. So I began painting these with these dots. The clothesline returned. A strange narrative, one I still don't understand, emerged. I know parts of it. My life continues to reveal what the story was. And the horse now had a spirit. It was no longer dead. It had a spirit and a tail that wove this corporeal, ephemeral, and sometimes cellular reality together. In the final painting, the figures dissolve into water. While preparing this talk, I realized it is the water that I experienced as a 2-year-old, but now it was illuminated. This painting was especially difficult. I mean, it's hard to believe, but I would get to a point where it was almost completely covered. I'd add one dot, and the entire painting would fall apart. And I had to keep, and then I'd go again. And I remember, this was some of my first paintings. So I was trying to learn from the painting how to paint, and how to resolve, and how to balance. And I can't tell you the number of times one dot would throw the whole thing into confusion. So while I was doing this, I felt compelled to start working with some bigger gestures. So I bought a canvas from the great canvas stretcher in our town of Healdsburg that was 72 by 48 inches. And I decided all these paintings would exist only as memories, photographic memories, kind of the way things actually happen in life. And I would begin with the color white, and when I was done, the entire canvas would be white. And in between that first stroke and the final coat, I would simply paint. That's what Ted was referring to. I photographed the painting when it felt complete. So this is a figure that came to me in a dream at Chaco Canyon. So I worked on this for 6 months. At the same time, I was doing the dot paintings. The figures changed, landscape entered. The canvas became a matrix in the terms of a mother, a womb that gave birth to image and story. The stories told themselves. It didn't matter whether I understood them. Though, in these past 28 years, they have continued to reveal themselves to me. You know, it's really wonderful to do work that keeps revealing as you get older. It's one of the great joys of getting older. And when I painted it, I wouldn't have known that. I was too young. And it didn't matter whether I liked the painting, if it felt ugly and chaotic, like this one. I would make myself sit down in front of it in a chair and sit there all day looking at it. And if I still didn't like it, I would sit there the next day and look at it. And it usually took about 3 days. And then I could start to see the strange beauty in it. And I could settle with the chaos that had been disturbing and begin to find something that I could move off of into order. When I loved the painting, I would do the same thing. I would sit in front of it. It was usually about 3 days. And then I was ready to let it go and keep painting. Under the final coat of white lay traces of 80 paintings. I've only shown you a few, done over the 6 months. In 1986, I made a black continuing painting, and in 1987, I made a red continuing painting. These continuing paintings continue to teach me that the well is always full. Even periods when you feel very dry as an artist, the well is always full. That letting go opens unexpected doorways, and that mythology is always present, and it waits for us to recognize it. In 1993, my palette transformed dramatically into one that Richard Spears referred to as that of the pseudoscience of alchemy. Being an artist, I could only do a pseudoscience. This is how the transformation began. I was visiting New York City during the holiday season. I was part of a river of people flowing down Fifth Avenue. But I was stopped in my tracks, and I moved away from the crowd. On the corner was a black Salvation Army Santa with ringing his brass bell. He was middle-aged, he was tired, he was leaning against a lamppost and had his kettle in front of him. And there was a way that images different cultures and icons came together in this man. And suddenly I had a picture of a slave ship with slaves tied side by side, manacled, and of Jews in Dachau starving on planks that were supposed to be beds, side by side. And I began to pick up my camera to photograph him, and I felt like that would be so wrong. So I put some money in his kettle. And when I returned to California, I began painting him. And I painted him for an entire year. With this first painting, which is 21 by 17 inches, I walked through an emotional doorway to find joy, rage, and sorrow woven into a timeless song of praise and longing. The week I began the series, I dreamed about some prisoners in an underground earthen room. The Santa became their protector saint. The title of the series became Prisoner Songs. That's from an Appalachian song that's called Prisoner Song, and it has one of the lines in it is, "If I had the wings of an angel, over this prison wall I would fly." This is 48 by 120 inches. And it's titled, "If I Had the Wings of an Angel." Heart and Soul, Flesh and Bone, 48 by 114 inches. The series began to move into abstraction as Santa fell to sleep. This is Wake My Spirit. It's 48 by 90 inches. But I've never shown any of these paintings. This is still during the period when I wasn't showing. The enigmatic markings of ritual and dream emerged. This is a diptych called "Tonight We'll Sing for Rain." After many abstract paintings, the Santa returned dancing. This is called When Prayers Go Up, Blessings Come Down. 48 inches by 90 inches. The final painting in the series, which consists of 20 very large and small paintings, the whole series, is titled Ain't He Good, Ain't He Good. It's a gospel song, and it's 72 by 48 inches. Soon after that, I remarried and moved to the Hopi Indian Reservation with my second husband, Philip, into what had been his father's home. And my studio, I made that out of what had been a former laundromat. And my palette distilled itself in all that desert light that I had so longed for. It distilled itself to the Santa's colors: black, red, white, and gold, variations of gold. The dots were replaced by sticks. This is a 4 by 6 foot painting. And each of those marks is a stick where I've drilled a hole and put a stick into the canvas. Ritual persisted as I drilled each of those holes. I think I was teaching myself patience. This 48, again, 4 foot by 6 foot painting is made out of clay. And one of the most abundant materials at Hopi is sand, in the house and outside the house. I swept a lot. So I started using the sand, sifting it as you would powders, over wet paint in order to change the quality of acrylic so that it became more matte and more real. The subtle gestures of feathers, again, these are all 48 by 72. I began using feathers. It's an element that represents millions of years of transformation. I mean, imagine an earthbound reptile, that scale becoming a feather that can carry a bird through the air. And the gestures are so different depending what the bird is and how much time it spends in the air, the gesture of the feather. Fiber re-entered, as did earth. And feather quills and holes. In this painting, after placing 40,000 sticks, my studio assistant Mariko, who lives at Hopi, and I multiplied it out. I put the painting up. The red wasn't there. Rudy, the red wasn't there. I put the painting up, looked at it, and it was dead. I spent months placing those sticks. It was absolutely dead. And one night late, I saw some red paint, picked it up, and simply made those marks across. It was either going to live or die. Only now, as I was preparing the talk, that I realized finally there I had brought the gesture and the dot together. They had been separate at the beginning, and then they were together. This diptych measures 6 by 8 feet. It has silk, quills, cotton thread, sand, and acrylic as part of its language. As I worked on the talk, I realized that during these past 2 decades, half of which I lived at Hopi, I have been exploring the membrane of night and the light of shadows that populate the Santa's dreams. In a dialogue with the Santa, he has taught me about silence so that I can hear what my heart has to say as though it were beating a drum language. I cannot emphasize enough that I have learned how important it is to listen to our work, to sit with it, to let it speak to us. But it was only during this talk that I realized, oh, this has been the Santa's dream. A few years ago, I attended a party at a collector's home in Santa Fe. I had loaned a piece I wasn't willing to sell to the collector, who is also a friend. She insisted that I tell Lonnie about the piece as she ushered us to it. Remember that, Lonnie? That was great. I want to share with you what I shared with Lonnie. When scientists tested the first atomic bomb, named Trinity, in New Mexico in 1945, the heat of its mushroom cloud sucked up tons of sand. The sand returned to Earth as a rain of glass, the opposite of rain that nourishes. As artist in residence at Pilchuck, I wanted to make pieces related to Trinity and the bombs we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the hot shop with my incredible gaffer, Karen Willenbrink, that was a gift, like this is a gift, with Erik, we worked with my far too literal ideas. By the fourth day, the fire and glass had won, thank goodness, and I stopped trying to control the process. Then, though I had walked past it every day since that I was at Pilchuck, I noticed for the first time the blackened trunk of a tree that lightning had struck years earlier. After scraping some of the carbon into a bowl, I carried it and a packet of gold leaf to the hot shop. First, I asked Karen to make a black sphere that represented the amount of plutonium we used to destroy Nagasaki and its inhabitants. It always struck me as it was one human handful. Having no idea what would happen, reminiscent in a small scale of what those scientists were looking at in 1945, because they didn't know what was going to happen for sure. I asked Karen to roll out the hot glass, place a sheet of gold leaf and some carbon on it, and blow the glass into a sphere. The gold dissolved to create a glow. That's the first piece here, to create a golden glow, and the carbon formed a cavity with floating ash. We repeated the same process. A mushroom cloud filled with floating ash, the gold forming a map around it, appeared. A crystallized shape suggested the blast wind. An umbilicus dropped from the cloud. Karen and I were stunned. We repeated the same process to make a trinity. The gold formed a cocoon around the carbon. A cocoon suggested in the umbilicus in the second sphere. Letting the materials and process lead and using the simplest shape, a sphere, a story emerged much deeper than my original vision. A story of the intimate and mysterious connection between creation and destruction. Sorry, dear.
To kickstart her learning, we invited Judy to take part in a painting with glass class in January, as I've mentioned previously. We wanted to give Judy a taste of what can happen in the kiln forming studio and to see whether the materials still spoke to her. As you might expect, Judy worked within her distilled palette of black, white, and red for all of the class projects. The glossy surface that is achieved at higher temperatures became problematic. It pushed the viewer away from the surface. The colors really didn't feel alive. Even when the frit was in high relief, it still didn't have the right feel. By the end of class, Judy was sure that she only wanted to work in black, white, and red during what would be, at first, a year-long exchange. And she wanted to work with glass powders fired to nearly the lowest temperature possible. We decided on 1250 degrees as having the right temperature, but in finding this right temperature, the colors still didn't have the right feeling. We experimented with sifting powder directly onto the shelf to see whether the effect of the base glass was having, or what effect the base glass was having on the overall feel of the color. Something was missing from the way that color was behaving. It felt synthetic, not really of hand or of earth. So we decided to use literal earth. Judy had brought this sand in from Hopi to see if we could breathe life into that color. if we were trying to work in glass and we were using the sand.
Yeah.
So Judy and I started to talk about how she arrives at the colors she uses in her paintings. Judy uses mixes of colors and material to get just the right feel for the surface of the canvas. I naively suggested that she try mixing colors together to get a black. Now, when painting, mixing ultramarine and burnt umber together, you get a black that ranges from warm to cool. We tried to find some of those equivalent colors in glass. In addition to a few colors, we had some hunches about that would get us closer to that search for the right black. We didn't get black. What we got was more mysterious. It was richer than the blacks that we had hoped for. The color was natural. It had the life that Judy was looking for.
What I realized, this is not about painting or mixing paint. This was about treating glass as the sand from which it came and learning from that about color and its relationship to light.
So we wanted to see what colors a larger range of mixes would yield. These are mixed in 25% increments so that we could see the effect the colors had with each other. However, we still wanted to find a very alive black. But the colors we were finding seduced us. And we wanted to see what other color combinations were possible. The process had become self-aware. It became our guide, and we were on a journey. We expanded that range of mixing to 10% increments. We knew we were onto something and needed a way to standardize this process. How could we explore the potential colors and be able to make direct comparisons? These complex colors needed a very simple stage to be presented on. We chose to make each sample the same exact way we do in class. Sift a linear fade from edge to edge on a 6x6-inch 4mm square. Fire those to 1250 degrees. And interestingly, with that size, we would get a perfect yield from a sheet of tecta. We set ourselves up for the careful weighing of powders by getting a very accurate scale from the most logical place. There's still glassware, right?
Right, all that glassware behind us, that's fabulous.
Cheap cups make great containers for weighing powder, but poor containers for storage, especially when you have mold-making classes that spill into these cups as they're stored under a table. We had no idea how large the project would become, so we strived to keep it as simple as we possibly could. As Judy mixed more and more colors together, we upgraded our storage system, or so we thought, to 5-ounce frit jars. Then, when we received an entire pallet of plastic jars, we started to get an idea of how much space this project could take up. So we settled on using small baggies, from a different store this time, a jeweler's supply, for holding all of the mixed powder. We also halved the size of the batch from 100-gram mixes down to 50-gram mixes of total powder. When we loaded the tiles into the kiln, single trips for those single tiles seemed to be such a waste. So we rolled them into the kiln in large batches.
And I soon discovered it was really important to have enough weight on the bottom of the cart as you're rolling it so that they didn't bounce.
Laying out individual cups for each load of tiles seemed inefficient as well. So Judy grabbed the glue gun, and the cups were glued down onto this scrap of mat board for quick and easy setup each week. Each week, we would discuss what colors to mix up. And each week, Judy would carefully weigh out the powders, mix them together, cut the glass down, sift the powders, load the kiln, program and fire the kiln, then unload and label the tiles. You might be wondering, what the heck was I doing during this time? Load after load, Judy would roll the glass into the kiln. And it was always a surprise when we would open the kiln and see what the colors had turned into. Every week, Judy would load up the kiln with roughly 30 tiles and then see what would come out. Week after week, month after month. Sometimes we would choose colors on a whim, or because we saw something last week that we really wanted to expand upon and explore. Or we tried to make a really ugly color, like trying to mix greens and pinks together. But what we found was that no matter what we mixed together, it had a richness that unmixed colors did not have. Looking back, this seems so obvious now. But what was fascinating to see was the colors that were coming out of the kiln, and then dream about how we would use those. Patterns started to show up, but we were not yet sure what they meant. We only knew we had to keep going. And going. And going. I actually really love in the sides of the image up there that you can see what's happening in the studio just in the little corners. And going. We wanted to take a look at a very large sample size so that those patterns would reveal themselves to us. But there were other obligations. Here you can see the floor wet from mopping for a class. So we kept going and stored the tiles until we could have time to reflect and digest and learn.
I had a show coming up in 6 months at the William Siegel Gallery in Santa Fe. Thanks, dear. Oops. Which way? Right here. So I decided to sift the powders directly on the kiln shelf, and I limited my palette to the colors that I knew. Basically what I was doing, I think, is simply lifting the sand that I had used all those years off the canvas at this point. So this is a 12 by 12 inch piece, glass mounted on canvas with drawing behind the glass. The grid behind the glass work is on canvas and it's sand. So there the sand and the glass were beginning to come together. So I felt limiting it to my materials that I already knew was a good idea at this point. That has changed and will continue to change. But there's canvas behind the glass. There's no light behind it at all, it's simply canvas. And this is a 48 by 72 inch canvas with 36 by 12 inch thin, low fired glass. And I'd spent years, what was so amazing about this process, I spent so many years doing my work on a canvas hanging on a wall. The hardest part of this process was doing it with the canvas lying down. My eye had been completely trained to being able to back away, look, come close, look, all those different distances that any hopefully good painting has, that it changes at each distance that you're away from it. And now I needed to work where I couldn't, finally I put a 12-foot ladder in the studio, but it's still not the same as when you finally put that canvas like this on the wall. But it was wonderful. It's so good to create, problems for yourself in the studio. So then I returned to making the tiles as well as exploring other shapes in glass. So months later, many months later, we finally had the chance to stop and take a look back at what data we had collected, what patterns had emerged, and how could we make any sense of all of these colors. So this is my studio, and all the tiles are, well, this is one small part of the tiles.
More importantly, what do we do with them all? It's not easy to move around a studio when you fill the entire floor with these tiles. So on my way to Portland, the shuttle van to the Albuquerque airport was packed full of people returning home from their visit to Santa Fe. In an effort to break the ice, with the woman shoehorned in next to me, I asked her where she had been and where she was headed. In reciprocation, I tried to explain to her exactly why I was traveling to Portland with mild success. Well, you see, I'm headed to a conference to present a huge palette of colors, and I've been collaborating on them for the past 18 months. The blank stare made it obvious that I had to show her a few photos of what I was talking about. So I pulled out an iPad, show her the slides that we're looking at right now. I tried my best to explain it to her. So what we did was carefully mix glass powders together at specific ratios to each other to get a better understanding of how color behaves in glass. These are those photos that you're seeing of all that mixing. So are you trying to sell these? She asked. No. I'm going to share these with everyone at that conference so that artists and other practitioners of kiln-formed glass can be inspired by them and then hopefully use them. Although I guess in the end, you are kind of paying for them, right? Because you've already paid to attend the conference. But they're more an idea or a path that can be used and not necessarily a product. Oh, that's so nice, she said as she went back to flipping through the colors. She would go on to flip through most of the slides. Some she would flip through quickly. Others she would stop, take a longer look, and make a comment about how beautiful they were. That's my personal favorite one right there. After a little awkward silence, she passed the photos back to me and went back to playing with her phone and Facebooking with her friends. What struck me was that she did not ask what we planned to do with all of these colors. I guess individually as artists beyond the presentation here. She did not ask how we had made a specific color. She did not ask what those base colors were. She only bathed in the colors for a few moments and tried to take them all in, as we will do now. What we had learned about color as it relates to glass powders, or what had we learned about those glass powders fired at such a low temperature? Well, we proved that black is a very dominant color. Duh, right? It's going to take over everything. But the real revelation was what we found working our way towards black. Rich, warm blacks. And seductive, cool blacks. Dark shades that can be used in place of straight out of the jar black to describe a shadow. We learned that, at times, it doesn't really matter what specific color you use as long as they're in the same family. We learned that it does really matter which colors you use because the name on the jar is not the same as the color that fires. What I mean by this is if you fire a color labeled transparent red at a low temperature, it isn't really red. It can be an orange color, or a little pinkish, or a little bit brown. The generic word association, or the generic word that we associate with certain colors, truly fails us when there is so much variation. When color goes beyond an enumerated set, we have to describe color in terms of memory or in terms of emotion. Take, for example, the color name spring growth on a spruce tree. If you've had the experience of seeing this color, of being in the forest, stopping to tie your boot while on a hike as a child. You have an emotional investment in this color. Later in life, when you see it again, it will trigger memories of that time. It will visually transport you back in time to the moment that you felt that soft, new growth of outstretched limb. Words will fail you as you try to describe this color to someone else. You'll have to show them this color. You will have to recall that memory and recreate this feeling the color gave you in others. We also learned that when mixing together opalescent colors, they retain their individuality. They have similarities to the technique of chromoluminism, more commonly known as divisionism or pointillism. This was a technique neo-impressionist painter George Seurat first employed in the late 19th century. Your eye does the work of blending the color together when you reach a certain distance. The neo-impressionists believed that by using this technique, they were achieving the maximum scientific luminosity, that's a hard one, possible. We learned that when you mix transparent glass, the colors blend together as light passes through that material on the way to your eye. This is much closer to how we understand the pigments in paint to behave. However, the colors made from glass powders have a way of interacting with the light that is totally different than paint. That because of the low temperature, these colors interact with light unlike that of colors that are fired at a higher temperature, glossier temperatures. The scattering of light across the rough surface allows the colors to be mixed away from the surface of the glass. They are mixed in the time between surface and eye. The colors change as you move your view or as the light source shifts. They behave like colors found in the natural world. They behave like the colors of your memories. Changing, shifting, the way your own perspective changes over time and with distance. These low-fired mixed colors we've been viewing feel so natural in their way the texture and hues reflect light that they connect us to ourselves and nature inspires us.
The blues of the sky, the greens of the trees, the browns of the earth, the shimmer of water. My heart has opened again to color in a way I could never have imagined during those 20 alchemical years of working with black, red, white, and gold. And before continuing the rest of our presentation, I want to use this palette to express how I have felt these past 18 months, working with Erik, Meredith, and Morgan in Santa Fe. Their laughter, camaraderie, spirits, and expertise helping to define this exchange. Thank you, Lonnie and Dan, for your remarkable generosity and trust in process. This has been a collaboration in the deepest sense. I hope each of you and other artists not here can learn from and add to this exploration of capturing light through these mixed, low-fired colors. We have barely touched the tip of the iceberg of nuances, subtleties and variation of color in the over 1,800 color mixes that we did. So just to continue, I cut some stencils. Again, remember, learning tapestry taught me the simpler is better for me. And I wanted to create elements with which to work. I also always learn to check if the kiln has fired properly before reaching to collect the pieces. And actually, this piece is really interesting now that it's been fired. So using the residue of the powders that I had mixed to make the 6-inch tiles, I decided to create 2 binders filled with samples. One binder for me, another for Bullseye, and I'm still in the process of doing that. I'll continue it in my kiln. After making clay molds, I laid pieces next to each other to slump them, but as we lowered the heat for the slumping, I found I could lay them on top of each other. Efficiency became really important in all these processes, and because I use so many elements, efficiency is really important. And so I didn't worry about them having to stick together. I think we fired them at 11, I forget.
I can't remember
11
right now.
something. These slump pieces were to be elements in my new work. One day when I couldn't come into town, Meredith picked up the pieces for me. She placed them efficiently in a box. She created by paying attention while performing the most mundane task, an inspiring arrangement. Of course, I immediately thought I had a box built by a wonderful framer in town. I arranged them again. It didn't work. But this was inspiring. But I tried to copy it, and it was dead. So then, what I do now is I continue to make the smaller pieces, but I find that the slumped shape is only one step. It's too complete. It's too figured out. So after slumping, I break the shapes. And that's what I've been doing, breaking the shapes and drilling holes in them, waiting to see what else they want. These red shards are sewn into sticks using black silk thread, a thread that I bought 35 years ago and now need. And it's a silk that you can never get again. It's gone. It's not available. Hand-dyed. A vocabulary is beginning to build that I believe will weave together elements from many parts of my years of doing art. It is wonderful to work with these pieces with beginner's mind and 40 years of experience.
For any of you curious, we're operating on New Mexico time right now, which kind of means it goes along with our state motto of Carpe Mañana, which is why we're a little over time right now. Stories kind of keep going, and that becomes problematic at times, and that's why we're always late for everything. It's impossible to recreate these colors in any other media, but we standardized the process of photographing the tiles so that they could be shared. I would carefully arrange the tile and label and frame, shoot the tile, and Judy would return it to its home, gain the next stack ready for photography. I would then download the day's photos and make an attempt to color correct them. Try not to go blind in this process.
Erik was walking around with one eye closed for days. It was terrible. So now to the future. I'll continue working with glass. It's going to become a basic part of my work. It's incredible at age 72 to find a new element that speaks for many of the elements that I've worked with over the years. And this is Dan's design for the bell of a kiln for my needs, one that doesn't need long annealing time. This is the bottom section of the kiln and the design for the elements that I'll be carrying home in my suitcase. And I spoke to my husband this morning, and he can't figure out the winch. He's going nuts. He's been working all week on it. This is when Erik was out photographing. My husband grabbed him to help with the building of the kiln. And Erik will be helping to build with the finishing of the kiln, with the installing of everything in it. My husband Philip in his shop. We tested to make sure that the fire brick would fit. The bottom of the kiln, it's at a wonderful height, so I don't have to stand like this the whole time that I'm working. I needed to make the buttons. Philip, on his machining tools, made me some dies. And there they are on the cookie counter. fired in their high fire porcelain. This is the bell of the kiln. This is the kiln. That is not a mechanism behind it that raises it. That's a press. My husband loves tools. But there is the kiln ready for everything else to be added to it now. As to the tiles, we'd love to, in Santa Fe, we're thinking it'd be really wonderful to have a community event of people naming the tiles and writing the stories of why they choose that name. We might be doing it as a fundraiser with one of the arts organizations in Santa Fe in order to bring the community in. People love color, and they love giving names to color. And we also are discussing ways to make the formula available to the larger population of artists. So a dream has come out of this exchange. I have never been interested in doing politically motivated work. As you could see from the atomic bomb piece, it wasn't politically motivated. It was about what is underneath that drives things happening with it. But to be able to create a healing wall from that material that knows no boundaries. So as I entered this new period of my work, incorporating glass into a language developed over the past 40 years, I want to end by sharing with you what art has taught me. The word journey came into English during the 1200s. It meant the amount of travel in a day. Each day in my studio, I travel great distances, turning time into space as I enter terra incognita. Art has taught me that our first language is the rhythmic beat of our mother's heart. Art has taught me that our second language is the texture of our mother's skin. These universal languages cradle my work. Art has taught me that what I gaze upon gazes back. From the macrocosm of the cosmos to the microcosm of an ant carrying a pebble. In my studio, I participate in a dialogue with my materials and they with each other. Paper, canvas, paint, glass, feathers, sand, and earth have unique voices. If I sit quietly and patiently, I shall hear their voice, and if I'm lucky, my own. Art has taught me that walls and doorways are the same thing. Art has taught me that an image can be a transformative gift of healing. Art has taught me that what we see is only a fraction of what is there. Art has taught me that the longer I make art, the greater the mystery. As the painter Philip Guston said, I go to the studio every day because one day I may go and the angel will be there. What if I don't go and the angel comes? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.